Hi everyone, my name is Phil Menino with Bazooka Farm Star. We've recently launched our Wolverine Agitation Boat. We wanted to throw together a quick training video for our dealers and sales folks, give you guys a walkthrough. It's going to be somewhat informal video, but I wanted to hit the high points for you so you can speak intelligently to your customers about this new product of ours. We started off the design for this with the intent of being low maintenance, always agitating, easy to use, very accessible components. We wanted to solve a lot of problems that are inherent with pump and nozzle systems, with maintenance and maneuverability. Again, very user-friendly controls. We wanted to make sense with very little training. There's always more depth you can go into, but we want that first impression with the customer to be great and real simple. Diving into some of the details around the corner here, we have a 7.1 liter Perkins engine, 302 horsepower. We're looking at offering a Cat engine in the future. This is essentially the same exact engine as Caterpillar offers, different price points. They're made on the same production line. If you're interested in learning where service centers are, you can go on to Perkins.com and look up your location. A lot of those service centers have over-the-road 24-hour service as well. So check that out. It's worth knowing before you dive deep with the customer. This system is all hydraulic driven. We have two hydrostats on it. One hydrostat runs our prop system, which I'll show you over here. We have two articulating propellers. These are 20-inch propellers. I'll go into more detail around how all that works shortly. But one of the hydrostats is running just the props. Those props are teed off with one another, and then there's a piggybacked second hydrostat. It's a little bit smaller, and that runs our wheel drive system, or you can flip a switch and select the pump and gun system. Again, all that I'll go into more detail. The props articulate together. They're run with smart cylinders, so they know where they're at all times, and this is essentially mirrored on the back side of the machine. Those props move together. They know what they're doing, or know where each other is at. They're very aggressive. I'll start it up here in a little bit and show you just the range of motion they have. There's only 8 hydraulic cylinders on this whole machine. We have one for the steering on both sides, and then 2 here, the smart cylinders for the prop articulation gimbal, and we have 2 for the pump and gun system. So there you have 8. It means fewer leak points. The valve we use is a proportional valve. It's all high quality components running this thing. Those smart cylinders are also stainless steel cylinder rods, so you won't have the pitting and corrosion over time and then causing ingress through the seals or seal wear, which gets manure into your hydraulic system. We use an innovative hydraulic tank that pulls the air out of the system very quickly, so that allows us to use a lot fewer gallons. For an all hydraulic system, we only use a little over 20 gallons. One complaint we've heard with the competition is if they have a hydraulic leak, there's 50 gallons of hydraulic oil they have to put in the machine at all times. So we don't have any gearboxes or transfer cases to maintain or keep an eye on oil levels for. And we use, I mentioned, all high quality components. All the hydraulic hoses that run through the hydrostat are rated for 6,000 psi. The system maxes out a little over 5,000 psi. All the fittings and everything high quality, meant for those pressures, so we won't have the hoses blowing or anything like that. The valving we use, or the benefit of the hydrostat, is also you can slowly ramp on and off. We can control that in our programming, so you don't have the water hammer effect causing pressure spikes in the system either, and that's what causes hoses to blow the majority of the time, as long as they were made properly. A couple details on the steering. We use 4-wheel steer. That allows you to do, we have separate front steering, separate rear steering. We use a tie rod style, so this is a double acting cylinder with tie rods so the tires are always in sync with each other, front and back. It's an identical system. But that allows you to do tight radius turns, or you can do crab steer and kind of move the boat sideways, which is really helpful when you're climbing out of steep banks, to be able to have that range of motion to get grip. Around the back, you can see the gun here on the front articulates up and down. It'll go to vertical downward, and that'll submerge the tip of that hose. It's a 5-inch hose outlet. But we have full range of motion side to side, up and down, and then we'll sneak around to the back here. We'll look at the submersible pump in there. So you can see it kind of alongside. I'll go into a little more detail in there on what's running that, but again, it's driven by a hydrostat. Every unit comes standard with GPS. We have 2 GPS head units. I'll dive into that in a little bit. 150-gallon fuel tank is centered up on the machine and set in. It's slightly submerged on the bottom. The benefit of that is stability. This is a very stable machine when you're in the liquid. It's all the thrust from the props go through the center line of the machine. It's a low center of gravity with the fuel tank and not a lot of hydraulic oil way up high. So the machine floats about right here at all times. So you can see there's a lot of flotation and buoyancy capacity left above. So if it starts to get unstable for any reason, you're trying to submerge a lot of tank. We're not floating right here, so you're not going to have that manure coming over the top where you lose all buoyancy. We use a very intuitive belly box style control. We'll sneak around this way. Joystick controls, nozzles for rotation. I'll go into more detail on that shortly. This comes with 2 chargers, a wall charger, so 110 volt, or a 12 volt car charger as well. There's also batteries that can be removed, and you can put into a battery charger if you have extras. That's an additional option. Right now I want to jump into how our propeller system works exactly, kind of give you guys a visual illustration of that. We have a paddle here that controls the prop RPM. You can see I'm spinning, and that's just agitation mode. If you bring it down to 0 RPM, a nice feature for anti-ragging, and if anything's caught up on that prop, you can momentarily go in reverse just by holding it down. When you let off, it stops going in reverse, just because you don't want to do that all the time. Showing you how this joystick moves and the articulation range of this prop. These have a lot of thrust on them, and look how aggressively we're able to maneuver that. So this is pushing the machine forward, to the left, to the right, and then I'll go backwards to the side. Whoops, there we go. Very aggressive setup here. All right, I'll shut her down and we'll talk specifics about the propellers. What we've gone with the props, we have 2 20-inch 5-blade, very aggressively angled propellers. They have a ragless design, so if anything starts to get caught up here, just the motion of the prop will slough it off. We have very little issue with things getting wrapped up there. And if some little things do, it's not a detriment to the machine. Like I said, you can go in reverse to get a lot of that off. Each of these props is designed to move about 12,000 gallons a minute. That means the machine is moving at full throttle about 24,000 gallons per minute. We have, again, controlled with smart cylinders, so these know exactly where they're at. You saw when I let off, they want to go back to the 0 position, which is straight down. The default angles can be adjusted with trim settings. We'll dive into details on how all that works after a bit here. And the props we made, these are fabricated in-house. keeps costs down. They're 5/16 thick AR steel. That's what'll be standard. So it's abrasive resistant steel. We are looking at going with different cast versions. We're working on dialing in those designs and eventually offering a wide iron setup. That's out in the future. No guarantees there. One benefit of this system is you always have all 302 horsepower that engine can provide going straight into the props, always agitating. You're not opening and closing gate valves. If you want to side shift, those props stop. They just shift side to side to move you around. So all the gallons are still going through this no matter what you're doing with the boat. Yeah, the opening and closing of nozzles, that means you're not using all that horsepower to agitate all day long. We've pulled up solids in some different slurry store setups or in-ground tanks from about 12 foot down. It was a 14 foot deep setup. They had solids in the bottom starting to float up. So we're able to get to that 12 to 14 foot range with confidence. Deeper than that, we don't have perfect data on any of that yet. So one thing that comes up is a lot of people ask that, how deep can it go? We always ask, well, how deep do the nozzles go to the competition's boat? So that's part of the discussion. A lot of people don't know that exactly either. Hydraulics on the props are very high pressure setup. We've got 5,000 PSI going to them, but again, we use 6,000 PSI hose. We use hydraulic swivels. If you come around here, you can take a look. So these will spin this direction, which is nice when the gimbal goes side to side, or we have swivels here. There's no moving parts in there. They're just essentially like a bushing setup. There's no bearings. These are rebuildable as well. You can rebuild them one time. We have yet to have any issues with this style, no leaks, nothing like that. They work very well for us. We also have high corrosion resistant coatings on there to ensure that doesn't happen. Take a look here. Why don't you sit down this way? This is a bazooka made bearing housing. There are no mechanical seals on this boat, so these are rebuildable. It takes a little bit of training, but it's not difficult. We have a very good seal system. It's two lower cost lip seals right there. There's a grease chamber right here. You can see the grease zerk, and then there's two more seals before you have your oil bath bearing housing, which can be refilled here and here. It's a fully sealed system. We don't have oil reservoirs and open hoses going into these bearings. We have yet to see a bearing issue. We've used these on other products for a couple years now. Very low maintenance. This grease setup is a nice block, so if anything does start to get through these first seals, it's stopped by the grease chamber. There's no over greasing here. You can grease that until it'll just purge out the bottom too, so you don't have to worry about blowing a seal. This is used in 3 pieces, so both propellers, 1 and 2, and then on the back side with our submersible pump, it uses the exact same setup in the same configuration. So those are 3 grease points you have to do, and then we recommend changing that oil every year is all. So it's pretty easy to get to as well. One other minor thing while we're here, we have this cone. This is an anti-ragging or wrapping cone. So if something comes in and hits this, it's not hitting a spinning shaft, so it'll just stop. It really helps keep stuff from getting pulled around the corner, like if the prop wants to pull it, or if you just had the bare shaft there. It also steers things into the ragless feature. Again, keeps things from getting wrapped up. This is a replaceable part. We recommend swapping it out every time you change the props, if the prop starts to wear in. I want to jump into how our wheel drive system works. It's really second to none as far as the climbing ability. One of the reasons is we use very large diameter and wide tires, real aggressive tread on those things. I'll go into the hydraulics a little bit more in a second, but I wanted to show just how it works. So when you want to drive the boat forward, you just hit forward on this left joystick, or drive the boat backwards, just hit back. And then front wheel steer is left and right, and then we can turn this knob to do a rear wheel steer on the joystick there. A couple of details I mentioned: the double acting cylinder tie rod setup. There's not There's not a raise and lower mechanism on this, which we purposefully got rid of because of wear points, and it also requires separate cylinders to run each tire, which can get out of sync with one another if you don't have a really high-end hydraulic system driving it. So we kept it simple. We have nickel-plated tie rods in there, and it's a very simple mechanism, really. It has Ackerman steering, so you don't have hopping when you're going around the corners with the tires running different radiuses. We have replaceable parts here too. There's 6 bolts holding on our steering mechanism. The pins can be replaced. Those are nickel plated as well. Simple single grease circ gets everywhere in that steering system. The drive, as I mentioned, uses a hydrostat and high-end wheel drives. So that'll run 5,000 PSI. Again, we have 6,000 PSI hoses going everywhere. All the hoses for the drive system are replaceable here, so they're really short. If you do have an issue, there's no clamps or anything. It's just zip ties, and you just run them right through here and can access them very easily there. So if there does happen to be a leak over time, it's a simple change. A couple of selling features of the way we've set up our tires and props. We have the prop is set up right between the tires, so it's your best ground clearance scenario here. Your tires go up over it first and your prop is always clear. It's also, if you get on the side here, you can see the tires are the leading edge of the machine, which is great for when you're going into high solids. You're not going to run the frame or any of the components into anything that keeps you from diving in. Ice, it's good for breaking up ice. Those tires pull solids down and get things really churning before you kind of hit a roadblock, so to speak, with your frame. You can steer them to work your way in. We really have never gotten this stuck. I'm sure there's scenarios that will, but there's always a way, or it seems there's always a way, with the high thrust and the ability of these props to really break things loose and maneuver them, as well as the tires between grabbing things and pulling it down, or like I said, working your way into a hole. So that's a huge selling feature and benefit to functionality. Again, making sure you don't ever run into scenarios where you're stuck out in the lagoon. Right now we're going to go over some features of our pump and gun system. It's a submersible pump setup and an articulating gun. It has a 5-inch outlet on it, so we have plumbing going straight to this. There's no gate valves or anything like that you have to open or close. It's a very simple system. We also, at the other end of this 5-inch hose, just inside the front end, there's an HSG, a 6-inch HSG coupling. So if you needed to pump out of the pit for some reason, or force feed your main pump for any reason, it is a nice backup plan. You can just connect a hose to it and use it for a force feeding pump as well. On the controls, as I mentioned, you trade off the wheel drive system here for the pump and gun. It uses the same hydrostat pump. So what I'm going to do, you can see ground drive was enabled. I just hit pump enable, and now I can maneuver the gun or turn the pump on. The pump, you can rev the pump up by twisting this knob. So you can see pump RPM is going up now. This will run at about 1,000 RPM when it's fully loaded, or the machine is at full RPM. And then I've turned it down. You can also, just like the props, send it in reverse by turning the pump off and then going the other way with that pump control. It's momentary, so when you let off, it'll go back to 0 RPM as well, so you can't just accidentally keep running that in reverse. If you back up here, we'll look at the articulation of the gun. Forward is up on the gun. All the way down, you can see it gets to vertical, which is nice. The tip of that is submerged, so you're not splashing all over. It's a nice supplement to the props. The main benefit of this gun, you don't need it to do the agitation. Again, the props are doing all the agitation work, but it's nice to break up solids or wet down solids ahead of the props, break off smaller chunks that then can get pulled into the propellers. We've used it for flooding areas, so if you just want to get more liquid into a certain area that's just high solids, you can do that, or like the inlet from a dairy lagoon or into a dairy lagoon is always full of sand. It's easy to flood that area before you get in there with the props. We'll sneak around back here. I'll shut the engine off, go into a little more detail on the submersible pump. Again, the goal with this machine, easy access, low maintenance. So you can see, you can access everything from the side of the machine. You can see the whole pump system is held on with 2 U-bolts, one here and then mirrored on the other side. So between disconnecting, there's a hose connection here from steel pipe to hose that you have to undo. 2 U-bolts, undo the hydraulics, and you can just drop this pump right out the bottom and you're good to go, or ready to go if you have to change anything out on that. The grease zerk for the bearing housings, really accessible here as well. Simple setup. It's identical to what we have on the props, as I mentioned. This is an 18-inch bazooka made cast white iron pump. So it's got the hardened volute, and then inside is the 18-inch impeller. It's 5-bladed, and it's made of hard ox steel. It's fabricated at Bazooka. 1 bolt holds that on. If you go down to the bottom here, one of the nice features for ease of use and low maintenance, accessibility, all of that, we have a suction cover that's held on with 4 bolts that are really easy to get to here. So if you need to get anything out of here, if there's a clog or whatever, you can very simply drop that suction cover off and access that area without having to reach in there and get a bunch of corroded bolts off there, because they will corrode over time. One cool setup or programming thing that we did as well, like I mentioned, all 300 horsepower goes straight into these props when you're not using the pump and gun. So when you want to turn the pump on, you've got to trade off some horsepower. So what we've created is a programming system, so as soon as you turn the pump and gun on, it will trade off that horsepower for you, keeping engine load maximized to what you want. And then without bogging the machine down, we want to keep the RPM up on this machine. That's best for cooling and everything like that. So it'll automatically drop your prop RPM down a little bit to offset whatever throttle you're at. So if you want half throttle, it won't take the props down that much. If you want full throttle on your submersible pump, it'll drop the prop RPM down to trade that horsepower properly. And it also keeps maximum maneuverability. It's one huge benefit of the prop system is it's totally separate from our pump and gun. Everybody knows those guns have a lot of thrust to them. They'll push the boat around, and it's nice with the props. They're a totally separate system. You can just keep pushing forward on that, or you can trim the props to always offset forward and default to that when you're using that pump and gun. You can maneuver the boat directly sideways with the props while you're using that gun. I'll get into some cool GPS features here shortly to help with that as well. Right now I want to illustrate how our GPS system works. GPS comes standard on every machine. It's not an option. We have 2 GPS head units, one at the front and one at the back. You can see centered on the machine, the yellow dome on top. Again, there's a same one on the back of the machine. The benefit of that is this system knows exactly which direction it's pointing between the 2. It does the math. So it allows us to control this boat in GPS mode to a much finer degree, and it allows us to have some pretty cool features I'll go into here. The system we've developed has 3 modes in GPS. One is cover mode, where it just covers an area, bounces around between the perimeter you've created with waypoints. It has point-to-point mode, where it'll follow the lines between the points. And then it has anchor mode, which keeps the boat in place and oriented in the same direction. I'll dive into the benefits of that here shortly. A little bit of background on this GPS or functionality. You need 3 waypoints at least, but you can have up to 8. So you need 3 to create at least a small area. You can do point-to-point mode same thing, just 3 up to 8 waypoints. So you drive the boat, set the waypoint, it'll toggle to the next waypoint. It's all on very visual on the remote. We'll show you that in some separate how-to videos. But so you drive to the next point, set it, the machine will beep at you to say it's got the input, and then get into that area and turn it on, and then it'll do whatever command you've set it to do. With the cover mode, one of the features we've added is it'll count how many times it's hit that perimeter between certain points. So it'll know where it hasn't been in a while, and it counts those up, and if it sees it hasn't been off to this other side for a while, it'll head over that way. The benefit of that is in narrow rectangle areas, it'll keep that boat from bouncing back and forth in that narrow area. It'll send it to that far side once in a while. Point-to-point mode, as I mentioned, you can do a zigzag pattern, so it'll send it back and forth if you want to do that. Or every once in a while, if you've created a perimeter, you can go from cover mode to every hour maybe go point-to-point mode, and then it'll start following those points around, so you can get that perimeter stirred up and then bounce around the area. And as the pit gets lower and the sides as the sides come in on the lagoon, you'll be able to ensure you're getting that outside perimeter very well. The last mode that we have is anchor mode. As I mentioned, that's just a single point. That boat knows where it's at and which direction it was facing when you put it in anchor mode. I think the biggest benefit of that is you can set it in anchor mode if you want to just stir that one area very well. You can trim the props out so they're pointed outward, which does the best job at bringing solids in. So if you're out in the middle of the lagoon, it'll pretty much stay there and work on solids. It'll cycle them in and then kick things out the bottom. The other benefit is when you're using this gun, you don't have, and you just want to flood an area, you don't have to beach the machine up on the shore in order to keep that boat from moving backwards using that gun. So you can put it in anchor mode and flood that area, just shoot liquid into a certain spot, and the props will take over, GPS will take over and just keep you there. So again, it takes kind of the manual control fighting that gun out of the scenario. All right, I want to go over some of the other nice features of the machine that don't necessarily fit into the different categories I've already discussed. A lot of them have to do with what did we do to make this lower maintenance, lower cost of ownership in the long run, etc. Well, easy maintenance as well. Some of those just little things, a gas assisted cover here. So you push that button, it locks it in, and then just pops up, gets out of the way, so you can do a quick visual inspection every day. You're not having to unbolt covers. There's a side cover here, same thing. It just tips out of the way, and then it's only held on with lynch pins. Very easy to get it off of the machine if that's what you want to do, you know, to more than just a visual inspection kind of thing. Real quick, grease zerks. We have 19 grease zerks total on this equipment. Right here on the gun for that swivel, 2 grease zerks there. Each of the steering arms has a grease zerk for the main pin. All the bearing housings, there's 3 as we talked about. The submersible pump and both props have that grease chamber. The smart cylinders in here, there's a cylinder under here and then the cylinder up here. Each of those has a grease zerk on the pin area. One thing about those pins as well, that the cylinders have a replaceable bushing, hardened steel bushing inside there. So if the pin wears out, it's a low cost swap, it's easy to do. Or if the bushing wears out on the ends of those cylinders, another low cost swap, easy to do. That'll really help those cylinders last a long time, in addition to the stainless steel rods that I talked about earlier as well. All right, to wrap up the video, I just want to do a quick walk around, talk about some things I haven't mentioned yet that we think are nice selling features of the Wolverine Agitation Boat. Kind of the theme being low maintenance, easy to use. But side floats, we have 5 floats, 2 on each side in a cage.
and then under the center there's a different one. But each of these side floats is identical, so they're interchangeable, easily replaced. The side floats here also, the cage is attached with 6 bolts, and nothing is attached on top of these. So if you need to get back in there to clean or maintain the boat at the end of the season, easy to drop these off, get them out of the way without having to deal with other things attached to them. We also have a built-in ladder on the side float frames and access some of the technology here. Right here we have our auxiliary circuit valve. This will run every cylinder that's used, hydraulic cylinder. And there's only 8 functions on this. They're all proportional valving, so you don't have that hard on and off like water hammer effect that can happen if you're just closing valves. We keep the handles on. We think it's a nice feature for troubleshooting. Users can see if that function is being actuated, so then we can help diagnose if there is an issue. Is it with the pump? Is it with the valve? Is it with the electronics? Is it with the cylinder? It's really easy to diagnose. Another feature along those lines, the Deutsch electronic connectors below here at the bottom, LED lights, so we know if power is getting to that circuit. Once again, another thing where on the phone with an end user, easy to tell what's going on. While I'm up here, we've got the battery box. There's 2 good sized batteries in there. This engine really only needs 1, but we think it's nice to have that backup. All the electronics for the engine controller are right here. I'm about 6 foot tall, easy for me to access from the ground. We also have a main battery disconnect switch and a warning. Once you turn the engine controller off, you need to wait at least 90 seconds before you shut the battery disconnect off, so that DEF can cycle back into the tank and then you don't have DEF freezing in the hose lines. Circling around back here, I just want to show how accessible the hoses are. All the hydraulic hoses, very easy to get to. The submerged hoses down here on the wheel drives, they're very short and they connect just right up here. They're not bolted onto anything. They're zip tied when they head across the machine there. But you're not having to fish hoses all the way through the machine. You can see up in here as well. Nothing's bolted down. It's just zip ties, easy to get to. That's pretty much commonplace around this machine. You can see even these main hoses while we're up here are attached with a bulkhead. So the hoses that come down to the prop motors are very easy to replace, and they're short, so you can save a little money there if you do have to replace those. Try to avoid those wear points that can happen, but stuff happens over time. So we wanted to make it easy to get to and take care of this machine. Up here we have the DEF tank, and all the electronics are covered. So we protect those from the manure or a washer when we want the machine off. You can also see over here we have one of the filters. There's 4 oil filters. It's an all hydraulic machine, as I've mentioned. We want to make sure that oil is staying clean. This particular one is also a water filter, so if a cylinder seal happens to be pulling in some liquid over time, that'll drain out here or get filtered out here and protect the vital components from damage. Up here we also have the diesel fuel fill. That goes down to our 150-gallon tank that's under the engine. And then the oil cooler fan. It's a good size fan. It's run by hydraulics. There's no electronic motors running that, so it's always cycling oil from a dedicated pump for this. It's very important that oil stays cool. We do have a temperature sensor that will turn this thing on and off, but if that sensor happens to go bad, it fails to on. So with the electronics not working properly, if that were to happen, you know you're going to get cooled oil. It also, the temperature sensor helps with high temp warnings, so you'll start to see warnings come across the machine, and eventually a shutdown if it gets too hot before components can get damaged as well. little tough to see here, but we have a hard pipe coming from our submersible pump that runs the gun. But right there, there's a small elbow, and that is connected with a 6-inch HSG coupling fitting. So that's one of the only seals really on that function, the pump and gun function. Everybody has a 6-inch coupler seal around. And it's also nice because you can unclamp it and connect a hose if you want to use this to force feed or just as a manure transfer pump. A nice feature to have. Not sure it'll get used all the time, but we like to have backup, right? That's really one of the themes of this piece of equipment as well. We don't want minor things like maybe a sensor going bad or not reading properly to cause the machine not to work. So we have a lot of fail-safes in place to where you can keep going.